Awesome. I'll do a little intro here. Cool. Welcome to Well Workplaces, where we chat with health and wellbeing leaders that create ripples of positive change in the workplace. And today I'm so happy and pleased to be chatting with Shelley Flett. Shelley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Virtually, I mean.
Virtually, of course, yes. Shelley, so far on this podcast, I've chatted with lots of different people. We've chatted with mental health experts, psychologists, talk about stress and mental health with a few different people. I've chatted with HR professionals and futurists as well, so a bit of a mixed bag. And the key theme that we keep coming back to is that for workplaces to create real change and for people to become healthier, and by being, I suppose, creating vitality in the workplace, the key feature and the key thing that keeps coming back to is the impact of leaders and the importance of leaders in how they can actually influence culture of the workplace. And at the moment, we've lived through a fairly solid, I suppose, and turbulent 6 months across the world. And from the research that I've been looking at, leaders are actually burning out at a fairly decent rate, and obviously having a number of challenges as well in, businesses like SMEs through to large corporations. And so this is really where you come in, Shelley, as the expert today on leadership. And I've read your book, The Dynamic Leader, which is absolutely a great, really practical read, and you've got some great stuff in there. So, but before we get into, what's happening in the future of leadership and the workplace, Shelley, I'd love if you could share with us what you're passionate about in leadership and really your story as well.
Well, so it's probably a really quick story. I was worked my way into a leadership role kind of from the bottom up, and then got it really wrong. And I share that in my book. And then I tweaked my style a little bit. I worked out that, I've got to be adaptable and I need to be accommodating of other people's needs and wants. And also that leadership is not about control, which I was a really big fan of. And so let go of a couple of things, did a few things differently, managed to get it a little bit right, and then decided that I was going to go out and do that, share that, and teach and coach other leaders to really become influencers and be better at where they are. So yeah, the journey in hindsight was actually quite simplistic and made sense. It didn't feel like it at the time. I've forgotten the second part of your question.
No. Well, you've really touched on, I suppose, your journey from. It sounds like being you landed in a leadership role by being maybe an excellent technician, and you really sort of put on the manager hat, perhaps, rather than the leadership hat. Would that be fair?
Oh, the whole idea.
Sorry, just go again. Cut out a little.
We just cut out. Sorry.
Yeah. And so from, I suppose, going from a technician through to a manager and really learning some of those, I suppose, those tough leadership lessons early on, is that what really happened in your early stages of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've got a bit of a mindset that if there's a better way to do things in a less painful way, then that's probably a really good idea to do that. And so I tend not to make the same mistakes twice. And I also like to listen to other people and search for solutions and opportunities to make the path a little bit smoother myself. And I think that's part of the work that I do with other leaders now. Is there's no need for you to make the same crazy mistakes that I did. Here's some insight, here's an experience, here's some insight. Then, what are the other options? What are the other opportunities? And I think, the way that I approach that leadership development is really around how can you keep sight of what you've got to do and be there for your people and get the things done, but also not lose yourself in the process. Because I think authenticity and the ability just to be who you uniquely are is, I think that is what's going to be relevant most in leadership in the future. And so bringing a little bit of that back.
I love it. Yeah, I think what you also talk about in your book as well is just how when leaders start off, it can be quite a lonely experience as well, and there is a lot to learn, and sometimes people don't really know how to, I suppose, be influential and not be too, I suppose, controlling, because we kind of come from that initially, that technician where we're really good at doing the task or whatever, and we sort of try and take that into a manager or leader position, and it kind of doesn't work. So you can't really scale your influence that way.
And I think that that's one of the challenges that leaders have faced since, the world has kind of shut down or transitioned to the virtual environment, is very much around building capability now. And that's probably the most popular conversation, or the most common conversation that I'm having with leaders, is now is not the time to continue to allow your people to depend on you. It's time to set them free, and it's time to build capability and be there to support them. But to do that, you've got to take a bigger picture lens. You've got to take a longer term view, because building capability and empowering your people to really own their space doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose that leads into like going into what's happened over the last 6 or 7 months in the world. And I know for myself as a business owner, the initial struggle for us was working out what the hell to do. There was a little bit of shock, I suppose, in the system, and there was a lot of effort applied to looking after people and making sure that, everybody is well looked after, and also mentally they are okay. With your clients at the moment, and if you can kind of go back to that starting point, what was happening with your corporate clients? What were they going through, do you think?
In the early stages of lockdown, they, very, as expected, very reactive. And I think a lot of us did react. I think we needed to really quickly. And I think that, so a lot of the leaders that I was working with were doing extremely long hours. They were almost overcompensating. And I think that leaders who already had a really good level of trust and highly capable people within their team, I think made the transition a lot smoother, because it was like, you just go about and do the thing that you're doing all the time, but in a virtual space. So the transition for them was quite easy, but for the large majority, a lot of burnout, a lot of not just time taken, like extra hours worked, but this emotional burden that I think a lot of leaders were carrying and felt that they needed to carry. And I think that a lot of leaders maybe operated from a position of sympathy over empathy and connected too much on a personal level. And I say that notwithstanding, it's really important to connect on a personal level. It's really important to support your people. It's also really important not to take too much on and deplete your own resources at the expense of others. I think you've got to look after yourself if you're gonna be able to show up in your best space as a leader.
Absolutely.
So it sort of starts with you first.
Yeah, that's really really good point, and I suppose that fits in nicely with the topic of well-being, really, because if you're a leader and you're burnt out and you're doing extended hours, and our experience with our corporates, our clients, was that people were actually working longer hours because they were juggling so much, and especially leaders were just working all day round, and then doing so many back-to-back Zoom calls that they were just useless at home and in their personal life, and also their self-care generally wasn't really, they didn't keep those normal routines that they have.
I think one of the dangers of leaders, and this is one of the questions that you asked earlier, I think one of the dangers of leaders not operating at their best is that leaders are extremely influential, even if they're not meaning to. So, for decades, for generations, an employee has always looked to their boss for guidance, and it's not always been a verbal question. It's been let me just watch what you do, and then I'll do more of that. And so you see a lot of modeling taking place in the workplace, and whether it's in person or virtual, I don't think it matters. I think that your staff will see how you are behaving. They'll see what you're doing, and they'll model that. And, you know, that's another conversation that I've had with leaders is when you're sending emails to your team at 11 o'clock, you are making a statement, whether you want to or not. And it doesn't matter how often you preface it with, I don't expect you to do this, but I'm going to do it. It's not okay. That doesn't help, because I'm not going to do what you say. I'm going to do what you do. And, you know, I've seen this across the board. Right. Even before lockdown, I remember having a conversation with a very senior leader about workplace flexibility. It's so bizarre that I talk about workplace flexibility. You know, letting people actually work remotely was this thing where, you know, it's part of our policy, and we encourage people to work from home or work wherever they need to in the hours that they need to. And I said, okay, great. So what's the take up of that? And he said, well, it's really low. Not many people have adopted it, but they know that I'm fully supportive of it. And I said, okay, well, how many days a week do you work from home, or do you work flexibly? And he said, never, maybe once a month if I have to.
Yeah.
And I said, there's your answer. If you're wanting your people to make change and actually embrace what it is that you support and advocate, you've got to go there first. And I would say the same thing about mental health and well-being, and managing your team's performance and well-being and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. I suppose you can have policies that are with HR that say, we support well-being and we support diversity or flexible working or whatever it is. But if the leaders aren't really, I suppose, modeling out those behaviours or reinforcing those policies with how they lead personally, it just doesn't go anywhere. And that's what we see on our side of the fence in well-being, in that we might have, let's say it's a mental health workshop or a training session, and it's quite involved and the whole team's there. Sometimes the actual leaders aren't present, and that is a little bit of a warning, a bit of an alarm bell for us to say, well, if we're going to get into seriously creating behavioural change here in the team, it's just not going to work because the leader's not here showing up. And when I say it like that, it makes it seem like the leader has a lot of, there is a lot of, I suppose, work on their shoulders. But that's kind of the reality, right, of being a leader.
Well, I think it's only a lot of work on your shoulders if you're doing something that you don't fully believe in. And so, you know, if you fully believe in the health and well-being of your staff, then just align with what you believe in, you know, and don't sign up to do things that you don't believe in. I think that's really important. I agree with you. When I'm running workshops and the leader is missing, it feels a little bit like a check the box. And I know that that's not how it's intended, but I think as leaders, we need to own the part that we play in the lack of change that takes place with these things because of our involvement or lack of advocacy, whatever it is. Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. Shelley, really good points there. And I'm wondering around going into I suppose, thinking forward now past COVID, and Melbourne's sort of open now, which is great. So we can get on the beers, get out for go to a restaurant and go on a holiday, which is great. For leaders right now, I suppose, what are some of the key, you know, strategies that they can implement, given that flexible working now is pretty much a thing and it's sort of set for the rest of the year at least? What are some of the things leaders could do, or what are some of the things you're recommending strategically for leaders to help with their leadership style, or maybe even their well-being?
Yeah, so one of the I've actually just recently published a white paper on career resilience, and part of that is looking at giving people back control. And I think there's nothing more beneficial than taking control of your own life, than kind of getting back in the driver's seat and going, you know what, there's a lot of things that are outside of my control, but there's a whole lot that's inside my control. Really encouraging leaders to shift the focus, not onto, you know, what are we missing, or who do I need to do this for me, or how are you going to help me develop, but actually going, here's the tools that you need to really take control and own your journey. And it could be your journey in your career, or it could be your journey in your life, but this concept around self-initiation, and because I think it's super empowering when you can say to me, here, I'm going to give this framework to you, and we've built a framework around building career resilience. I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to support you through this, but ultimately you're going to own it, and I'm going to let you drive it. And so, you know, when I talk about building capability, it's a really great way to start to kick off that capability conversation. You know, the 3 core elements it looks at is, what's your level of awareness? Are you actually noticing what's going on, not just within your immediate role, but what's going on within your business, your industry, the broader environment, and that you're aware of what's going on from different sources, that it's not just mainstream media and it's not just social media, but you're tapping into different sources. It looks at attitude and, you know, what's your mindset, and do you have the right approach? Do you have this approach or attitude around abundance, or are you operating from a position of scarcity? Because that can also impact your, the well-being when you're focused too much on scarcity. And then also adaptability. You know, how willing are you to try new things, to step outside your comfort zone? Psychological safety has been raised as something that's been really important over probably the last 12 to 18 months. We've been talking about psychological safety. And so, you know, that adaptability, the ability to try new things, it requires a safe space. So I would say to leaders, continue to create a space where people can be their true, honest selves, where they can fail and get back up and learn from that, and where you're going to support them through it.
Yeah, really good. Can you go back to the scarcity piece? Can you talk about that a little bit further? I really like that.
So I think when fear drives us, we can operate from a position of scarcity. And when we operate from a position of scarcity, we become quite competitive. And I think we can become very focused on self. So how do I save myself? And, you know, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that basic need for survival really kicks in. The thing with scarcity is that it's not always reality. So we saw this with the toilet paper concept in the supermarket.
How good was that? I mean, no, that wasn't good. It's kind of funny from a human behaviour thing. What is going on here?
Great case study at some point on the. I mean, that's a perfect example on the impact of scarcity. When people are driven by fear, they do not operate in their best self. They operate for survival, and but it's generally survival of self, not survival of all. And I think we've got to, particularly as leaders, this is not survival of self. This is survival of all. How can we continue to come together as a community and be able to operate in a way that we all thrive? We've just got to get a little bit more creative about how we do that in this environment, because things have changed so like there's been such huge change. We've just got to change how we're approaching that. Like, where is the abundance, and how am I viewing things? It might not necessarily be abundance of wealth for a little while, but there's abundance of other things that I think we can focus on.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. And I think for leaders as well, and just for everybody really, in that this time, like what COVID has given us in some ways is time, and it's time to think about what our values are personally, how good are our relationships personally and in work. And some workplaces have bonded even further during this time, and others maybe have gone the opposite way. And so for leaders, you're sort of saying there, it's really, you know, using, having a bit of a deeper think about what you're about, and also how you can bring that to the table, and then effectively bring that to your team and your employees if you own a business. Fair to say.
And I mean, these kind of things, Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these kind of things are all contagious as well. Like we mentioned about modeling, you know, it's if I see other people doing it, then I'm more likely to get on that. Yeah, so really important, I think, for leaders to maintain that. And I think to achieve the abundance around self-initiation is really just to have the courage to go out there and be bold and brave and do it yourself. Go there first. I always say go there first. If you're a leader and you want change in any place, you've got to go there first. And I find that when leaders build the courage and the confidence to go there first, it's very quick that their team follows, provided they've got the level of trust with their team.
Yeah, amazing. That's awesome. And so, Shelley, just thinking about I suppose the future of work and where things are heading into next year and even beyond that, I feel like with COVID, for most businesses, it's just brought what they thought they'd be doing in 5 years to, you know, right in front of them today. With leaders, there's a fair bit of activity that's going to be required over the next year or so. And then beyond that, with workplaces, do you think flexible, like the hybrid workplace is going to be a mixture of sort of 50-50, people working from home and people working in the office? In your view, what do you think the workplace turns into and the importance of leaders in amongst that?
Yeah, well, I think leaders need to be really on their agile game. They really need to be able to kind of go, well, how's this going to work? And I think it's similar to what businesses have faced over the last, 10 years, where we've transitioned from this inside out approach where historically businesses were all about, all right, well, how can I produce a product? How do I want to run this? What are my processes? And then provide that to the consumer or the customer. And then the customer had to work their way around business processes. Now, today you don't see that. Today there's very much an outside-in approach. That's why human-centered design is really important. It's all about what are the needs of the customers. So we've already seen that from a customer's perspective. I think now internally we're starting to witness the same thing. So it's not about this is how I lead and this is how you need to conform. It's very much around what do you need from me and how can I be in service of you? So a little bit around that servant leadership, albeit I'm not a fan of the word, but to be in service to the people around you. And so to do that, you've really got to go, well, how can I make sure that I'm adapting my style as much as possible to allow for the needs of the people within my business, and then let them grow, be flexible on the things that you can be flexible on. I think start to focus, if you're not already, and I'm sure most people are now, is what are the results or what are the outcomes that I need, as opposed to what do people do with their time. Time is definitely a conversation if someone's struggling to get through the work or to, deliver the outputs. But it doesn't always have to be about time. And I think, in terms of leaders being able to constantly adapt and change, I think they've got to be willing to make the shift themselves, and be aware of what is at risk if they don't. So I've been to a couple of conferences they're Singapore-based conferences, but they've got global experts that come to them. And for 2 years in a row, and including this year, it was a conference that was held in September. For 2 years in a row, the biggest challenge for CEOs is retention of top talent, even now, even through this pandemic, even when there's increasing unemployment, retention of top talent is still a challenge. And so for leaders over the next 1, 2, 3 years, I think retention of top talent needs to be something that drives the decisions and the choices and how you lead your team.
Yep. Fantastic. Oh, that's a really good summary and some good predictions there. It seems like from my personal experience in my own business as well, it feels like for me, in the way that we've led our teams over the last 5 years, things have changed as well, in line with what you're saying, in that it's definitely gone from we have an L&D program that you attend and we work together with you and we present to you, to more of a conversation around, well, what do you like doing? How can we help you? How can we facilitate your learning? And the ownership, I suppose, in some ways shifts back from the manager previously to more the person actually within the business. And we're kind of, it's almost like the design your own pathway in some ways, and the role of the leader is to facilitate it and to bring them along on the vision and the journey, I suppose.
Absolutely. What I love is you can see that that's happened in the consumer space. You can see, well, I can get what I want the way that I want it with the things that I purchase. Why can't I get this as part of my my way of working? And I think the answer is, well, you can. And where you can, then let's enable that. Let's remove the invisible obstacles, because I don't think they're physical obstacles a lot of the time. Sometimes they are, but most of the time they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember over sort of a 10-year period of time, I remember going to one of our workplaces, and people would come to work with their shirts and slacks on and everything. And then even just the dress code over the last decade has completely changed, and the way people show up has changed. I'm wearing a t-shirt today, and I've been wearing a t-shirt for about a year. I kind of looked at, I've got a LinkedIn photo and it's me with a jacket on, I think, and a shirt. I'm like, why am I wearing that? I don't ever wear that. Kind of funny. It's kind of like almost a mindset shift with leaders, I think, now, is you can just be yourself, not worry too much about
it really
being formal.
It really is. I actually remember there was some research that was done, and this is probably going back over a decade now, where they actually measured the productivity of staff who wore casual clothes to the workplace, and they actually saw that when casual clothes were worn, that productivity dropped. And I think that was a business case to not allow, I think casual days were actually eliminated for a little while in the organisation that I was in at the time. But I think that times have changed. I don't think there's still the correlation. I think that I can be just as productive in my Ugg boots and jeans on the bottom and, my professional on the top, as what I would be if I was wearing really uncomfortable high heels. Well, you probably don't on the high heel front, but I think that we've got to constantly go back and just challenge our assumptions on things, and just check it for its expiry date, because I think that some of these assumptions do expire and we forget to update them and keep up to date with what's happening. I think if you look at the business like the retail consumer environment, it seems to be a fairly good predictor of what the expectations are going to be in the workplace. So I think, watch that and then start to take some insights from there.
Yeah, really good. And lastly, Shelley, just to summarise all this, would it be fair to say that in the future or going into the next little while, leaders, the type of leader that we're looking for in workplaces or business owners, they're going to have to evolve a little bit? They'll have to be more emotionally intelligent, express more, what's the word? Empathy. that's a very empathetic, unempathetic way of saying empathy. And yeah, what have I missed there? What should we be looking for in leaders?
And I think this is where the career resilience framework comes in handy. It is about remaining relevant. And I think for you to remain relevant, you've got to be constantly adapting. And it's not about, I don't think it's about easy anymore. I think what is easy, so for leaders to remain relevant and to survive and continue to thrive into the future, I think that there's a bit of a letting go for the easy path. Now, I'm not saying easy isn't a good way sometimes, but I think if you're not challenging yourself to really evolve and develop and grow individually, then I think you will be at risk of losing relevance, because I think as a nation, we are becoming more emotionally intelligent. You look at what the kids are learning at school. They're talking, I run a resilience program, and I'm talking about keeping a cup full, and then someone chimes in with, my kid calls it a bucket. And right. This idea that at school kids are learning about resilience and the importance of, that those kids are fast becoming adults. And we need to catch. I think we've got a bit of catch up to do because,
Yeah.
What we're teaching has evolved.
Absolutely. And probably the other thing in amongst all of that is the disruption of, or the innovation that's about to occur generally from a technological standpoint, where everybody that is employed and leaders is included in this, is the appetite to adapt needs to be there to keep up with the technological changes that will occur in the next year or two or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think remembering that if it's easy enough for a machine to take it over, the machine's going to take it over. So opt for hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Shelley, we've covered off quite a lot there. We've gone through your journey and your story, as well as covering off on what the key sort of issues are for your leaders, especially the ones that you coach, and also just looking forward going into the next year, what people will be facing, and some of those key features of leaders, what's really important for them. So thanks so much for your time today. It's been a really great chat, and I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was good chat.
Cheers. I'll just